Hello everybody and welcome back to Military Aviation History. I'm your host Bismarck and today we're going to talk about this. Now you might now be wondering, why did you just see a B-17 with such an elaborate paint scheme? Well, the short answer is that these are assembly ships and they were vitally important to the Allies when it came to conducting their bombing campaign during World War II. However, that is only the short answer, so I'm going to be reaching back in time here and explain the full picture to you in this video. However, before we do that, I am very happy to announce that we have launched an official merchandising campaign with Everpress. It is going to run roughly another 20 days and you'll see the dates indicated right here. Once that is done, Everpress collects all the orders and sends them out worldwide. And yes, I do hope that you guys enjoy Luftwaffles for breakfast. It's a great way to support the channel. Definitely check it out in the description below for the link. Anyway, assembly ships. We have to reach back into 1942 here, late 1942. This is when the US Army Air Force conducts their first operations coming from England. The interesting aspect, actually, as a side trivia, is that the first mission they ever fly, it's on the 17th of August 1942, does not in fact go to Germany. It goes to France, and they, with roughly a dozen B-17s, bomb a city called Rouen. After that, of course, a dozen aircraft doesn't sound like much, and in things to come, it really wasn't that much. But the operations ramp up relatively quickly. For example, October, the Americans launch a bombing mission with more than 100 bombers. And in these early missions, they notice, well, quite a few things. First of all, compared to the British, of course, the Americans are doing daylight bombing. Now, this does improve accuracy a fair bit. However, it comes at a price, and that is being German fighters and, of course, also being German flag, but mainly fighters. In fact, early on, the Americans realize that the bombers are really vulnerable. Even the B-17 and B-24s are really vulnerable to enemy fighters. And with all the data they collect initially, they have the statistics to prove it. For example, on the 17th of April 1943, a formation of B-17 takes off and goes over to Germany. 15 are lost to fighters, an additional one is lost to flak, and 48 are damaged. Now, these 48 damage shows how much damage a B-17 can really take before it goes down. I remind you, 15 actually went down. But it really does show that they are, in a certain sense, vulnerable. Especially, you got to remember, at this time, the Americans, especially on missions going into the Reich, don't really have escort fighters. When they go over to France, especially on the coastline, no problem. They can have RAF Spitfires escorting them, or even American fighters. But that range element that comes with long-range escorts, the Americans really only solved the big issue there with P-38s and P-51s later on in the war. They realized that from 100 bombers, 48 are lost when flying in formation and 52 are lost when flying out of formation. Now, the ratio between those two numbers doesn't seem that significant, does it? And it's not. However, if you drill down the numbers a little bit more, you find one very fascinating thing, and that is from the 48 that are lost when flying in formation, 26 are lost to enemy fighters, and the rest is lost to flak. However, from the ones that are lost, the 52 that are lost flying outside of formation, because, for example, they were hit before and they started lapsing back, or they never really made it into the formation in the first place, or they got lost or something like this. From those 52, 46 are lost to enemy fighters, and only the remaining 6 are lost to enemy flak. And this shows how important a tight, coherent formation is in defeating enemy fighters. And this really sparks the idea of establishing a well-maintained formation of all these B-17s and B-24s that has the defensive firepower capability to keep these fighters at bay as much as possible. Now, you got to remember, of course, these statistics are only just numbers and reality is somewhat different, but such statistics teach us a lot of things, and the evidence also proves that flying in formation is better for bombers. So what the Americans eventually established is a quote-unquote combat box. Now, the combat box is not really, even though in some of the literature it is quoted as being a standardized formation, it's not really a standardized formation. There are very few little intricacies sometimes, also between the different air forces. We're mainly going to look at the 8th Air Force here operating out of the United Kingdom to strike Germany. But the combat box, really what it is it's a concept. It is establishing a formation that maximizes defensive firepower, while at the same time also clusters the aircraft close together, so that when the first bombs start dropping, the spread of the ordnance that is being dropped is not too wide and really concentrated on the target that the lead bombardier was aiming for. Now, one of the first established formations was javelin down. And this is a lead element, followed by another element, by another element, by another element, just staggered essentially in what is a line formation at different altitudes. They realized a line formation not really that big of an asset when it really comes to the fighting. So what they have done instead is they spread the formation out a little bit. So you, for example, have a lead element, let's say 3 aircraft, and on top of those you have another element, that is the top element, and then below, slightly to the side, you have another element, which is the low element, and then you also have a low element. And this is essentially roughly 12 bombers flying in a tight formation at slightly different altitudes, slightly staggered out, and this really provides all the gunners with a perfect field of view and also allows them to maximize their defensive firepower for incoming crowds. However, maintaining such a formation of, let's say, 12 aircraft, that is already quite taxing on the pilots. Yeah, because while the, let's say, the distance between the aircraft in the elements is roughly 70 meters, if it's perfectly flown. It's not always perfectly flown, but well flown anyway. It is still very close. So these guys not only have to watch where they're going, but they also have to keep an eye where their friendlies are going. You got to remember, radio silence is a thing. The lead element cannot just say, like, we're going to turn to 90 degrees port side. No, you have to pay attention or what's happening. He can maybe flash lights or something, or fire or flare, that he can do, but radio silence is a thing. Anyway, 12 aircraft, that's already quite taxing. But the Americans don't just send 12 aircraft, do they? No. Overkill is a thing, ladies and gentlemen, and they're sending 50, 100, 150, 200, and so on and so forth. They sent a whole bunch of bombers. Now, of course, this is not one massive formation. These are certain groups and kind of elements, and, well, groups as in the way of a group of aircraft, not as in the actual army formation. But you also, you have actually these group formations, and they comprise, then multiple group formation comprise a wing and so on, going into Germany. And there is a certain amount of distance between these group boxes, and then there's a certain amount of distance between these combat boxes and so forth. However, getting all those bombers to the target is quite difficult, but getting all those bombers into formation in the first place is even more difficult. And cue the scene for the assembly ship. We are now 1943, 1944, there are more bombers in the sky, the thing is getting more complex by the minute, and we really, to establish a coherent formation in a reasonable amount of time, is getting really difficult. The United States Army Air Force hopes to establish these formations going over to the Reich within 1 hour of the first aircraft taking off. Gotta remember, multiple bases in the United Kingdom, all these bombers taking off, for establishing formations at a rendezvous point, let's say the coast, in radio silence, I remind you, because the Germans, they are listening on the French coast, and even when they were pushed back from the French coast, they're still listening from the Belgian coast or the Dutch coast, and then they're still listening from the German coast and so on. So the less indicators you give them that you are coming, and the less opportunities you give your wireless operators to maybe accidentally slip in your target into the conversation, the better. So radio silence, once again, is a thing. But to establish these formations, the US Army Air Force hopes that in an ideal scenario, it is done within 1 hour. Gotta remember, we are talking about 100, 200 aircraft here, going to one precise point and flying in these little formations and establishing themselves. You know, there's one group here, there's another group there, there's another group there, and so on and so forth. And it has to be tight, it has to be coordinated. And that is really difficult. 1 hour hardly ever cuts it. Usually 2 to 3 hours. In fact, instead of having me explain it, why don't we have a pilot who flew a B-17 explain it to you?
Now, if you ever saw this takeoff pattern, you'd be amazed. Flares are shooting off all over the morning sky. And after I take off, all the rest of the planes in our group follow us up through the fog. We'd fly back and forth until you pick up all your people and get them into formation. Then, our box would have to be at a certain buncher at a certain time. On the 29th, we were to fly high right to the 44th Bomb Group. So finding them was our next job. You look all around and you say, geez, we're supposed to be over here now. So the 392nd would wheel around and pick up the 44th. They, in turn, would fall behind the 398th or the 492nd Bomb Group and form the 14th Combat Wing. Then, we'd all follow the 2nd Air Division, which was only part of the 8th Air Force bomber stream. Believe me, there were times when everything didn't go quite as planned. On one occasion, I actually went all the way to Kiel by myself. I couldn't find anyone from my group. I thought to myself, boy, this is ridiculous. What the hell are we doing way out here, all alone? Luckily, no fighters picked us up, and I came in with a bunch of B-17s. I came within 50 feet of them with all our guys waving and shooting flares and whatnot, just to tell them, hey, we're your buddies. You're not supposed to break radio silence, and even if we had, they wouldn't have known for sure if we were the enemy. We had heard they had some of our airplanes and were attacking us, right in our own formations. All those B-17s could do was to judge us by our actions. It was a funny feeling to have all those guns pointing at us. I don't think they trusted us until we went in at IP and dropped bombs with them.
So, with ever-increasing number of aircraft, with the onset of bad weather and the long distances, the lapses in concentration, the assembly ship comes to the scene. These are usually older models of B-17s and B-24s that are stripped down of their armament, and they're given extra navigational lights, they're given extra flares, especially extra flare ammunition of a specific color. I'll mention that a little bit later on as well. And they are given a very, very distinctive paint scheme. You gotta remember, all these elements that are going over to the right, they already have little intricacies that differentiates them from other aircraft. Yeah, they have, for example, on their tail, they have a triangle, or they have a circle, a circle, of course, and a square. And then they have a letter, let's say K or J or X, whatever. That differentiates them, and that differentiates their flight from all the other flights. But those are little elements that you don't always spot. So the assembly ship comes to the scene. It is colored in bright colors, highly contrasting colors. You can see these guys even in bad weather against any kind of background, and they allow the formations to to assemble a lot quicker. Now, the assembly ships are the first ones to take off from a base, and then all the other bombers follow them, slowly form up. While this happens, the assembly ship is flashing its lights, it's firing flares. In fact, it fires distinctive colored flares that only certain aircraft and certain groups are supposed to follow. Because you got to remember, if all assembly ships, let's say, fire yellow flares or green flares, then if you're, as a pilot, told to follow a green flare, you're going to automatically go to the nearest guy firing a green flare. However, if your assembly ship is the only one that's firing a green flare and no other green flare is being fired, the possibility of confusing two assembly ships is less. It's not that often that it happens. Also because the assembly ships are giving distinctive paint schemes from each other. So you know that, the red and white one, that is my assembly ship, or the spotted one with the white front section, that is my assembly ships, and so on. And there's a wide variety of assembly ship color schemes out there. The air crews and the ground crews, they went wild with these things. In fact, go to Google after this video and just type in assembly ship B-17, B-24, and you'll find a fascinating plethora of selection that you have there. And if you're a model maker, why not think about actually making an assembly ship? Anyway, there are certain elements that come in later into play, later during the war, that also allow the bomber formations to assemble a little bit quicker. For example, in 1944, the buncher radio comes into play. However, the assembly ships are never really phased out because they are so crucial, they are so helpful, and there are such a practical way of handling these problems as well. It's really, you're losing nothing by doing this, and you're gaining a rather big advantage when it comes to assembling these formations. Anyway, I hope you guys enjoyed this video, and make sure to check out the link in the description below, not just for also my sources, which are always linked in the description below, but also for Everpress right here. I also want to thank SideStrafe for providing all the vocals to this video that weren't my own. And make sure to check out his channel as well. He's a great voice actor, and I hope you guys enjoyed this video. Make sure to check out my Patreon if you want to see more, and as always, have a great day, good hunting, and see you in the sky.